Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Greg Curtis. I'm with Toothblackener Presents. I'll be your moderator today for today's panel, this afternoon's panel, which is, what is the title of this? Thank you, Promoting Your Work Internationally. There it is there. I did do my homework. I'm not improvising here. I got a structure here for today. We're going to start with some panel introductions, and then we'll move on from there. I'll start with myself. Toothblackener Presents has been around for like a dozen years in Calgary. Because it's Calgary, it does a lot of projects. So Toothblackener Presents books 5 venues in town, including McEwen Hall, McEwen Ballroom, the Bella Concert Hall, and the Grand Theatre, and the Den Pub. We do shows wherever they fit around town, Jack Singer, Jubilee, wherever it belongs, all the way down to the Ironwood. Lots of corporate events. I book Canada Day for the city. Put together Sled Island's Outdoor Festival from a production standpoint. I could go on and on. There's just a million things. Perhaps the most important thing, though, that Toothblackener does in relation to this is we also manage Hello Moth. And there's going to be a lot of references to that pretty quick here. Immediately to my right is Cory. Do you have a microphone, Cory?
Yeah. Hi. I'm Cory. I run Inner Ocean Records. We're mostly an online-based record label. We do a lot of chill music, lo-fi hip-hop and beats is kind of our main thing, but we also do, we started like a sub-ambient label last year. And we've strayed from that a bit. We've done some like modern funk and a bit of like kind of garage indie stuff. But it's all like we mostly work with producers who just work out of their homes or bedrooms. It's all pretty DIY. It's just me and Mike there that run it. That's kind of the.
Have you had some success with that?
Yeah, I mean we're growing pretty quickly. We just started, or just finished yesterday, our first artist residency. So we're now flying artists in to come to our studio, and they're recording music, and we're filming episodes to try to kind of amplify what they're doing. And a lot of these guys are quite elusive. They're really good at making music, but not very good at showing who they are, what they're doing. And so it was an initiative that we came up with a few months ago. So we just finished that first one yesterday, and it went pretty well. That was kind of fun to watch these guys that you don't really know, and you get to see so much more about what they're doing kind of behind the scenes. So
that's a fascinating world you belong in, and a world I know very little about, but it's a growing world as well.
Yeah.
So. And to the right of Cory is Nick.
Yeah, I'm Nick Duncan. I do A&R for Sub Pop Records in Seattle, Washington. Before doing A&R, I was in college radio promotions, specifically focused in North America, college radio and non-commercial radio. As an A&R person at Sub Pop, I have worked with bands like Level Up, Frankie Cosmos, Fourth Wanderers, and most recently Orville Peck. So a lot of what I do now is scouting talent and trying to bring bands to Sub Pop and Hardly Art.
Are there a few A&R reps at Sub Pop?
Yeah, so the way we do A&R at Sub Pop, we have a group of, it's like 8 or 10 of us. Most folks on the A&R staff also have another job. They may be a publicist or a radio promoter who also does A&R. And as a group, we sort of, it's fairly democratic. We like bring things to the table and vote or reach consensus on a given project.
Are there any Calgary acts on Sub Pop?
Chad Van Galen.
That's the one.
Yeah.
So it is possible.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Anything you want to add? That's good. Marphen.
Yes, Marphen Mijnals from Amsterdam. My first time here. I'm a board member of New Skool Rules. New Skool Rules pretty much focuses on talent scouting and management. And also here, first time just to experience how you guys work over here.
Sorry, could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sorry?
Could you elaborate a little bit further?
Yeah, sure.
More detail, you in particular.
Well, my focus is mainly on what does it take to get through in the business. What are the do's and the don'ts? That's what we focus on. A lot of the talents which we scouted in the Netherlands now are top charts artists. So that's pretty much cool stuff. And we're also looking for talented abroad, and also looking for interested acts, maybe to join us on our festival in May.
Right. Is this not for profit or is this a for-profit company?
Both.
It's both.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, if we could have just a little more quiet at the back of the room there, guys. It's hard enough to hear with the coffee shop across the way there. So, thanks. Right. Let's you know who we are. It's important for us to know who you are right now, so we know what we need to talk about and where we need to take this conversation. So, what I want to do is just to get a show of hands about who you guys are. So, how many people here are musicians or aspiring musicians or soon-to-be professional musicians? Ooh, a good 50% at least. Industry folk. How many people are in the industry, want to get in the industry, working towards being in the industry? Well, those panelists from last time there. Okay, that's good to know. Right. Okay, so this is about international exposure. And what we should do is go through the panel and talk a little bit about at what level we're talking about here. Because international exposure, obviously, it runs the gamut. You have probably Drake at the top end in The Weeknd from Canada, just as Canadian examples. And then in other subgenres, and perhaps, maybe, Cory, you can speak to this a bit, is people we've never heard of. Acts that are doing things in the world that we, in genres we don't know about. Certainly, like I say, I don't know much about your world at all. And all the way down, like international exposure doesn't necessarily mean being top of the pops all around the world. If you could just touch upon in your mind what that means. What is international exposure for your particular world in particular?
At least in the world that we work in, everybody's independent, and like you said, most people are not artists that you might have heard of. So the way that we've gone about it is just to sort of tap these pockets in cities all around the world and just built a network of people who are interested in these sounds. Like say we're going to tap just Calgary, it's probably a pretty small market. It'd be a very small niche. If we put on a show, we can maybe get 50 people out. But we've always just focused everything online, hitting up people wherever we can find them, and it's sort of it's been sort of an alternative way. It's more about friend building and building connections with people than it is necessarily about promoting. I just, at least
no live touring aspect, particularly to your world, is there?
In our world, it doesn't really work well if you're trying to sell somebody something. It's people get sold stuff constantly. It's constantly bombarded with buy this, buy what, So if you create this community where everybody's kind of supporting each other, it becomes sort of this self-sustaining thing. And so, Spotify has been pretty pivotal in our world and the people that we work with. And that, there's artists that we work with that are getting more streams and have more monthly listeners than a lot of quite famous artists that tour around constantly. One guy we work with from, he's Norwegian, but he lives in France, and he's got 2.5 million monthly listeners. And, it's a bit of
is
a
there a way to monetize that?
Oh yeah, it's all monetized. He's making sick cash. But the difference there is that you guys probably don't know his name, but I guarantee you've heard his music being played in cafes because those playlists are just everywhere. Restaurants, cafes are playing this stuff. I guarantee you've heard it, but you won't know him. So it kind of is, it's a bit of a different model. So
you're still utilizing the big tools like Spotify and I gather
for sure,
whatever,
Bandcamp,
Android.
Spotify, SoundCloud,
right?
All Apple Music, all of them.
But you're creating your own niche in those worlds.
Yeah, it's the playlists have kind of changed that. We were talking earlier, and we still promote a lot of albums, and we do records and tape cassettes. We like albums. We grew up in the era of albums. But playlists are quickly becoming the new way people listen to music.
I'll leap right over to Marphen if we could. I'll get back to you, Nick, but because that seemed to tie in a little bit to what you were talking about.
Yes, exactly. But what you see is that mainly not only focus on getting abroad, but start to fix where you're based at. So try to think about getting followers, getting on Spotify, create a good bio so everybody knows where you're based in your hometown, in your country, how you work, what you do, what your work is. And then it's more interesting for us to try to achieve and to get chances and opportunities abroad. So that's what we try to manage, and we try to teach everyone we work with. Yes.
And Nick, is Sub Pop a little more traditional in its approach? Do you think? Marphen, can we to international?
Oh yeah, I mean I think
these guys are bonding internationally through various methods here. They're not going through a more traditional like go find a label in England and get them pushed to radio and that old.
That's
school kind of
definitely a big part of how we develop an artist is through that sort of process. But a lot of the artists on our roster are artists that we would consider developing artists that we're kind of building from the ground up. And what we talk about, especially in the radio world where I kind of started, is building a narrative and building a story. Some of that has to do with numbers. Some of it is airplay and chart position and all that. But a lot of it is getting to know an artist, getting to know their community, getting to know what they're a part of. An example of that for us, Father John Misty, when we first launched that Father John Misty, that first record, no one knew who he was. We didn't sell it as Josh Tillman, who was the drummer in Fleet Foxes. It was, this is something new. This is a new story for us to tell. And he created a fairly compelling character that I think people were able to latch onto right away. And through telling that story, with the subsequent success at college radio, which then developed into non-commercial radio, we were able to build that story and help expand his profile outside of just the U.S.
It really helps that it was a great record too.
Yeah, that's always nice. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to back up for just a moment. How many people were here for the last session? Almost all of you. That's great, because I don't want. What I'm trying to do here is avoid getting redundant and talking about some of those details that they got into in the last session. I thought the last session was fantastic, by the way, but they were really about how can I do this? What's my next step? I'm going to try to focus a little bit more on the larger picture here and what's going on in the world, and hopefully you can take a look at that from your perspective and go, how does that apply to me, and how can I take those small steps that they talked about last time and work into what's going on in the world. And one of the things I want to talk about in relation to that is I was having a good conversation with somebody from Live Nation the other day about how acts no longer break out of territories. How it's not. I used to tell people, try to make concentric circles around yourself. Break in your neighborhood, break in your city, break in your province, break in your region, break in your country, and then go from there. Doesn't seem to be happening anymore. That's no longer the world. The world changes. And I mean, I can point to the big guys like Drake and Weeknd and a bunch of those guys, even Sean Desmond for that matter. Those guys did not start somewhere. They broke internationally around the world all at once. That it all happens at once around the world. And you say, well, yeah, that's great, big pop guys. That's going to be go on forever, and that's always the world. But that's not true, because you look at that band from Regina, the Dead South, and everybody had seen that band for years and kind of just like, oh yeah, it's those guys. They play that thing. That one song hits, it hit internationally all at the same time. Those guys are doing 1,700 people in England these days, and the same numbers all over the world. It didn't happen where little territories got excited and it kind of built its way up. Speaking of this, I want you guys to kind of address that idea. That is the idea of areas and regions in the world breaking down, and that it's the whole world is the whole everything all at once. Father John Misty being probably a good example of that.
I think I think it still starts that way, in my experience. Is that it's very rare for us to sign a band, let alone have success with a band that doesn't already have something going on locally within their own community. Level Up, the first band that I brought to Sub Pop, two guys from that band were running a record label that was gaining some popularity. They ran a DIY space out of their their spot in New York. They were doing a bunch of shows. And so for me, they were on my radar both as a really exciting band, but also as a band that was very plugged into what was going on around them. And then once you hit that point where, for them it was coming to a label and kind of having our marketing team behind them, the avenues open up to expand beyond, quickly beyond your immediate home. You don't have to go from New York to the Northeast.
Right, it went from New York to the world.
Right, but in order to hit that point, there had to be something happening in their immediate community for a label on the other side of the country like Sub Pop to take notice. Right. So it's maybe a mixture of the two approaches. I think there's still reason to focus locally, at least as you're beginning to develop as an artist.
Marphen, do you agree with that?
I totally agree. It works both ways. You have to work at both, because let's say, for instance, you get internationally known, and they're going to check and see, hey, where is he from? What did he do? What's his resume? Then they'll need to see what you did before. What were your previous acts? Where was it built up? So that's the whole part of the whole image, is maybe not the correct word, but what you're trying to build up. So it's still really necessary.
Okay, maybe we're missing the middle ground then. That what happens is you build a buzz in your hometown.
Yes.
And then no longer the world big in Japan, as that joke used to go forever, doesn't exist anymore. We're huge in Germany. Yeah. I mean, that's not a thing anymore. Maybe it's like you go from your hometown to the world.
Yeah, being huge is great, but you need to have a base. You need to have a starting point, for sure. Yeah.
Any reflections on this, Cory?
I think that we're just in a bit of a different category, because we work with people who don't typically play shows. They're just producing music, and they put the music out. Some of them do play shows. Many of them won't post a single photo of themselves, or you won't even know what their name is or anything. So I think for what they're doing, for sure. For us, it's just kind of these guys give us this music, and we just try to put it out to where people want to listen to it.
But you put it out to everybody in the world at once.
Yeah,
you're not going
exactly.
Well,
so
let's build an audience in Canada or Ontario and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I don't really focus on certain spots. I mean, maybe a little bit, just because you have, say with Spotify, you do have major centers streaming the most music. So LA, New York, Houston, London, England, these kind of places.
That could be just a population-based thing, though, couldn't it?
I think it's also based on how Spotify themselves markets. But then, on the other side of what we do, which is selling the physical units, we do it all ourselves. We distribute and just sell direct to customer. I'm constantly surprised as to where we send tape cassettes, which we sell an insane amount of. Records, they go to these random places all around the world, most I've never heard of, and you can kind of get some trends. We obviously sell mostly to the U.S., but then we sell a ton to Japan, Germany. We do Canada is by far our smallest market. I don't know why, but Canada for some reason is very hard to push what we're doing, and because I recognized that early, I didn't make it a priority, which I feel sort of bad about when I say that to people. And even here in town, we're not probably really that well known here, because we don't really go out and do the local thing. But I guess we're trying. I'm here now.
Did you have a comment on that?
Yeah. Just want to say that big in Japan idea, it is still definitely a thing, but I think it happens maybe in a different way. With the advent of streaming services, things like Spotify, you're casting a very wide net, right? You're sending everything to everyone all at once. Every territory, even territories where before, Sub Pop wasn't selling music in Brazil because the infrastructure to have a distributor there and everything, it didn't exist. But now with Spotify, they're getting it too, along with the U.S. and Canada and Europe and everything else. But we found when you look at the markets where an artist is streamed most frequently, there are certain trends that are artist-specific. It's, New York and L.A. are always probably going to be in the top 10, but for certain bands, Beach House is one where Mexico City. Not all of our bands get a ton of streams in Mexico City, but Beach House, big in Mexico City. And so that changed how we marketed one of their recent records, where they did their big record release show in Mexico City.
So they're building tours around where those numbers are coming in.
Yeah, especially when you see a really clear trend like that. But and so that dynamic of like, there are certain territories where an artist like over-indexes. That still does exist, and it is something that we're looking at when we're promoting a band internationally. But I don't know if it happens in the same way. It seems like Spotify has kind of maybe made that a more democratic process because everyone has this access to listen to things.
Well, and that creates a different problem altogether for people, is that now you're not competing against the guys in your province or your state. You're competing against the entire world at once. The noise out there, the amount of volume out there now is that you're out there with everybody else, and you're going to have to make that standard and find that fan, making it extremely difficult. Let's lead into where does the industry come in at that point? So you're at a music summit like this, and you see something. I mean, are you going to make the difference to that act, or is that act, is that going to help?
Sorry, am I going to make a difference in
you see an act here that you're engaged with, and you say there's really something going on here. You take it back to Sub Pop, saying we got to work with this act. Does the build from the act have to happen internationally before that happens?
No.
No, you're looking for ground level acts.
Yeah. Well, and really, a lot of our conversations about international acts have less to do with the difficulty of promoting them, or like where they're based, as it does the logistics. Like, we're working with some bands from Australia right now, and we had a conversation where it's like, man, it is really hard to promote a band from Australia to the U.S. because of touring availability and the cost of getting folks over here. Those are the kind of conversations we're having when it comes to like developing an international performer. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Yeah. Marphen, do you want to come in on this?
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the things that you're doing? Like, you come to a conference like this, and
Yes.
you say you engage in an act. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to happen, but suppose it does happen. What
I
kind of things?
hope so.
I hope so too.
Well,
What kind of things are you going to take back to Amsterdam with you?
but I also watch the person or the band or the act because it's the total package. And like I said, for instance, just focus on what you're doing and making good music and making good stuff. If you focus on that, the rest will follow. Get it on Spotify and start to create what you do, be the best at what you do, and then we can try and get it abroad. That's the most important part. Yeah.
So the cream does rise to the top. Is that kind of the bottom line there? If they're out there putting it out there on Spotify and the attention starts happening,
Yeah.
Have you done that? Have you guys gone and actually sought somebody out based just on? Wait a second, I'm starting to hear something about this guy over in Egypt or over in Bolivia or over in Bulgaria.
Yes, and then you start watching. You're going to watch his bio. You're going to watch how many followers does he have. You're going to watch the net, search everything, and then you say, hey, this is something. So then again, you get back at where he's based. The base you had, how is that built up?
So there's no region that you're not looking at.
No.
The world can operate from anywhere now.
With one simple push on the button.
Let's go into some. We'll try to. I'm trying to bring it back down to somewhere where this can be of assistance for you guys, both as musicians and industry people. We'll get to the question now. Sure.
Yeah, following up on what you said about like touring availability and how you target international marketing. Is that genre specific, artist specific, as you said? Because obviously, marketing an artist to the entire world is expensive and probably find places where they'll resonate.
That's a good question. I think it tends to be like a case-by-case basis with a given artist. Like, there are certainly situations where like we have tour support conversations about like, hey, this is blowing up in the UK. Like, we need to get, like, Rolling Blackouts Coastal Fever is an Australian band that is signed to Sub Pop, and they got insane press in the UK. And so we had conversations between us and their Australian labels. Like, it's worth investing and getting them into that market and help building them there because there's already something happening. But not every artist, you don't see that kind of trend with every artist that we work with. And so it's really comes down to like doing a sort of like cost benefit and seeing if it makes sense to try and send someone out there and develop that further.
That's good. Anybody else want to comment on that? No? Not your role? Great. I want to touch base on, we kind of started on this, but I didn't really get into it far enough. because we're dealing with an international thing, I looked at that panel previous, and that was like agents and promoters going, okay, how to get started? How do I get myself on the road? If this is true that you're going from your city to the world, and that I'm postulating that theory and hoping that we can elaborate on that. What role do these music conferences play? As it stands right now, you could go as a music industry person, I could go to one of these every single weekend. There's a music conference somewhere in the world every single weekend, and some of them are great, and some of them are okay. It's fantastic, by the way, that this one's here in the city because it doesn't really cost you guys anything to be here. When you make that effort to go to, I see Canadian Music Week, and you see a lineup of 10 or 12 Calgary bands driving down to Toronto to play Canadian Music Week, of which I recognize maybe 3 or 4 of them, and of those 3 or 4, I go 2 of them shouldn't be there because they're driving all the way to Toronto. There's spending gas money and hotels and food. They're doing one showcase there for a bunch of for the bartender and the sound man, and then turning around and coming back. That's the worst case scenario, obviously, but and that's why the advantage of having it in your own town is fantastic. What role do these play? All these millions of music conferences around the world?
Sure.
What role do they play in your world?
Yeah, for me personally, as like an A&R person, the benefit of these conferences is sort of twofold. One is artist discovery. There are bands playing at these conferences that, as someone in Seattle, I would never see otherwise. And in some cases, bands that have not toured in the U.S. because it's prohibitively expensive for a lot of Canadian artists that I've been wanting to see. And so I get a chance to see them at these things and meet them and build their relationship. And the other advantage is building relationships with other industry folks. For me, as an A&R person, I imagine it's for a lot of folks who do this job, a lot of how we hear about stuff is through relationships with booking agents, with managers, with other folks who maybe have heard something or working with an artist that I haven't heard of yet, and they'll send me demos or early mixes, whatever, and then that starts the relationship. And so coming here and meeting with booking agents and managers and kind of doing the networking thing is hugely beneficial when I go back to Seattle and I'm looking to listen to new music.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I got a good Chad Van Gillen story about that sometime.
I want to hear it.
Yeah, I think for us, like, we don't do too much.
Is there an international music conference or a regional music conference of any sort that applies to your world?
Not specifically to what we do, I don't think. Not that I've seen. But we do attend some things. We're pretty selective. Like, we don't usually do it for scouting artists, but we'll try to go make a relationship with somebody in the industry for a particular thing. Like, we recently went and met with the guys from Bandcamp, just because Bandcamp is a pivotal tool for us. So meeting them and networking with them, that allows us to do more for the artists that we work with. But yeah, that's kind of the extent for us. We're pretty just focused on just like the
Maybe you should
projects we
start a
have.
music conference for that genre.
That sounds like a lot of work.
You still with the question here?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
still no, I'm still with the question, but you already said everything in which I agree, because it starts all what we said. When you're going to a conference, yes, you try to network, you try to meet up with new people, to build up relations. So that's why you're doing it. And by just staying in your country or your city doesn't give you those opportunities. So we love that, and also for meeting up new talent and new potential. So that's why, sure.
For you, it's worthwhile for sure.
It is.
Is it worthwhile for an artist to go to what's the big music conference? The 12 big music conferences.
New Skool Rules in May.
That's
Yeah.
that's a big one for this.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Self-promotion.
Is it interesting for an artist to just hop on and come on over to Amsterdam? No, because you need to focus, you need to have a strategy. So if it is that you see like, hey, I'm getting followers or streamings from specifically Amsterdam, yeah, then it's maybe important through the persons you're working with to try to get in contact with promoters in the city, and then start checking the possibilities.
Working it out from there.
Working it out from there. Yes.
I guess that kind of brings us to a kind of do-it-yourself ethos that a lot of people are here working as their own managers, agents, publicists. And unfortunately, they may want other people on their team and helping out, but or they may not. Maybe they're doing. There's a side to that says don't hire those people.
So
you can do it
don't
yourself.
hop on the plane, save that money.
Save that money, yeah. I'll give an example. I mentioned earlier that I manage Hello Moth, and we got invited to play the Great Escape, which is a great festival in Birmingham, south of London, and I worked my ass off at that thing. I worked it so hard trying to make things happen and get the right people there. In the end, we came out of it with kind of an interesting. You never really know what's going to happen. We came out of it with an interesting scenario where we met this artist from Latvia, and then did the typical exchange situation where we brought her over and had her open on a tour, and then went back to Latvia and Eastern Europe and did a tour with the other way around, and. It was actually very successful. It was an opportunity to explore markets that very few people go to. The Latvia, Estonia, Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic. These places that are not. They're very welcoming for Canadians, by the way, too. It was interesting to see that they want the exotic nature of somebody coming all the way from Western Canada to those locations was actually a bit of a bonus, but it was a real do-it-yourself operation, and it was a tremendous amount of work without much help. I want you guys to speak a little bit to that and make maybe perhaps some suggestions if you are going to go to a music conference. What can you as an artist? I mean, we talked about what you guys get out of it. What about these people as artists and industry people? What are they looking to get out of it? What's the opportunities there, other than the drive to Toronto to play to the bartender?
Experience. Try to learn from the the persons you meet. Try to get inspired of their work. Get in contact, because those contacts can be very virtual. So be open-minded. Mostly you see that you're so focused on what you're doing, what you have. When I meet people, they are, oh, my name is blah, blah, this is, can you follow me? That's nice, but try to be interested in what the person does, because maybe it gives more opportunities and more possibilities than you imagined or had in mind up front. So,
That's a good point. I often suggest to people, by the way, that make friends first and then do business later, because I know you may only have like 2 minutes with the person or 3 minutes with the person, but I'm more apt to pick up that phone call from the nice guy who talked to me about the beer that we're drinking than the guy who's like pitching at me really hard.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Like, I feel like you have to establish like connections and relationships with people that are real, and the only way to do that is to play the long game. It cannot be like, I just met this person super quick. Maybe sometimes that happens, but it's like sometimes it's like it could take you like 9 months or a year to really like establish a good connection with somebody, and then that will pay off like crazy. But it's like when people feel like you're pitching to them, or again, like I said earlier, like selling them something, like, oh, listen to my track, put it on your playlist, but that gets like really tired, and I feel like in positions like ours, like it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other, because we just get so much. It's like 50 messages a day of that. So I think either whether that you're doing that online trying to make the connection or in person, it's like I'm always thinking about the long term, and like, okay, how can we just like kind of break it down and be real here? So that's my tip.
I guess that means you're going to have to remake that connection again throughout some other sources. Maybe re-attend someplace where that person's going to be. That's a good point. It's a lot of work.
And you always find a way to send somebody a message somewhere, right? Like people, I'm sure you guys get it. Like people will find your email or your DM somewhere, and there's been lots of times we've made great relationships with people who we could, obviously they're pitching us something, but they do it in a way that's not like too aggressive. It's very like natural and real, and even just like it could be something really simple that they say in their message that I'm like, oh, okay, like I feel that, rather than just drop you a link, yo, check it out. That doesn't usually work very well. So,
Nick, do you want to add to this? It's covered pretty well, but
No, I totally agree. What I would add is that they publish the the list of delegates for all these conferences well in advance. And some of the, like, my best experiences of going to these things is meeting up with a band that hit me up before the conference. And, you know, in those cases, there was some sort of connection there. Like, maybe that's a good tip for people if you are reaching out to delegates. Like, know a little bit about what they do or who they work with and try to see if there's a connection there. Most recently, I was at another conference, and a band hit me up like, hey, we're actually on this small label with a band that I know you're talking to. I'd love it if you could see our band. That little connection got me out to that show. And the environment of these conferences is that we're all sort of mingling and hanging out for a number of days. And so you have this opportunity to not just like have a label person hear your music, but actually hang at the bar and have a conversation and get to know, build those relationships, which
That time's way more valuable.
way more valuable than any sort of elevator pitch.
Invest in your approach.
Yeah,
Right. That's a very good point.
yeah.
I guess the point there being that to focus in on people that you can find a kinship with, or you think there's going to be some sort of possible relationship there, and don't splattergun everybody trying to say, come see my show, come see my show.
Totally, yeah.
Okay, it's getting a little later, so I do want to get to questions if there are any. If there aren't, we can continue on this tact. But is there anything, perhaps, yeah, maybe I didn't get specific enough. Maybe we are talking a little bit general, but if there are any questions, please, I'd be happy to direct them to whoever. We covered it all. There's no questions. Okay, sorry, go on.
So, as a band who's not necessarily in the popular music sphere, but kind of outside of that, in the rock scene, how do you go about like building a community around your music? Because like, I know you said put it out there, but like, what do you do after that? Like, should I be putting money into like, social media and stuff like that, or is that worth it? Or?
My personal feelings on that is like I tune out when I see a boosted post or a promoted post. It feels like I'm being sold something. So like putting money in social media, just a personal thing, is like not something that I would recommend. Someone gave me advice at one point, like so much of like the music business is being in the right place at the right time. So like try to be in as many places for as much of the time as possible. It's like play as many shows as you can, like meet people in the scene, like build those relationships with not just like other bands, but people who book venues and people who, you know, like I'm sure you have local radio promoters in Calgary, and like start there, like actually, you know, but I think the way you start there is by playing shows and getting out there, not just sending your music out, but performing and being in a physical space where you can meet people.
That works for rock music, but perhaps not for all genres. Yeah.
I think it goes back to my point about like you're trying to make a connection with people, and in your case, because you're a band, you have to play shows. Then I agree with what he's saying, because that's the way you're going to make the connection with people. People want to see you and see you perform, like, which is different than say like what we do. There's no performance. The connection. I don't know what our connection is. Just a vibe.
Is
It's more of a
Is
feeling.
there never
for
any
us.
live performance aspect to that?
Sometimes, but they're not usually very like performative, and because the music's so chill and kind of quiet, it's not. It's more suited to like a lounge type environment.
Right, or
thing.
maybe an art gallery or something.
Yeah, that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry, there's another question?
Yeah, in Canada, a really good way for promoting yourself across is through campus radio. And I was wondering internationally, like in Europe, is there an equivalent? Is it as relevant as it is out here?
In my experience, no. I'm not super familiar with the radio landscape over in Europe, except that, you know, our UK office primarily focuses on like BBC or like the big like national radio outlets. I will say one advantage you have in Canada is that the NACC, which is the North American College and Community Chart, is based in Canada, and so a lot of that panel of stations, that's the college radio chart, a lot of those stations have like CanCon rules, and so as a Canadian artist, you kind of have a leg up on that chart, which is also, it's for all of North America, so that's the US college radio chart as well. It's definitely a great place to start building there. But as far as internationally, I'm not sure. My impression is that it's not as much of a thing. It's not as a,
Spotify is more the tool for like what people just listen to.
Yes.
Marphen, yeah. Marphen, you want to take that one a bit? What
We're
kind of
all
yeah?
promotional.
What kind of promotional tools are there in Holland right now?
Yeah, in Holland we have some radio. We have, like for instance, phonics, but it won't say a thing. But it's the same way. You try to get in contact with your local radio producers, and then you go national. But for here, I totally agree with what he said. Just try to focus on getting it here, and then on Spotify. Yes.
So there are other, but there must be other avenues.
Yeah, but if you go to, for instance, like he said, England, Great Britain, they're focused on the BBC, on the greater stations. So that's a tough one. Yeah. And I would think I wouldn't think you should do that then, because it's a waste of your your time. Yeah.
So a lot of, well, let's just dwell on this for a second. There's a lot of acts locally that would perform here in Calgary and get a bit of an audience, yourself included, based on college radio play and you know, excitement around that. There must be, how does that happen? It's got to happen in Holland. How does it happen in Holland? Is it just publicity? Is it people read the press? Where does it come from? Like, how do you find out about the local acts?
Well, we hear it on the local acts are on the local radio stations. So
Commercial radio stations or college or?
Not commercial, no. So really local, really not. We have FM and AM, so really local, and then we hear it. And by hearing it, then it gets in the community. And then if it's great, it gets bigger to the bigger ones, and it gets to Phonics or 538, and then it goes abroad. Yes.
So the
538, for instance, and phonics also are available in England and in Germany. So that's then if you reach that, then you're halfway there. Yeah.
And there are a number of these smaller stations in Holland.
Yes.
Yeah, that you can access and get your material
Several,
to.
really a
Maybe
lot.
get an interview on, and when you're out there
really
touring.
Yeah, really a lot.
So not too dissimilar to Canada.
Yes, no.
Except the cities are closer together. Okay, let's go there.
Good question. We're focused on urban and hip hop. So if it's that scene, I would say focus on the bigger cities, because then you're where the heat is. Depending on your genre and where you're working it, try to focus on, because for instance in Holland you have in Utrecht you have a whole different pop culture. So then I would say try to focus on Utrecht, which is smaller and which your approach is a lot easier. So it depends on which genre you're working, but to get a main stage, I would focus on the bigger cities, yes.
I just want to comment on something the last panel said. They're not here, so I can say this now. They were saying focus on Europe rather than the United States because you have to get all those forms and it's expensive and everything. There's a band out of Calgary that a couple of decades ago called Chicks Dig It. Remember, you know Chicks Dig It? They didn't focus on...
What's the name?
Chicks Dig It. They're kind of a punk band. They were a punk band. They are a punk band. They didn't focus on Canada at all. They went to the United States and focused on the west coast of the United States. It paid better. The cities were closer together. The roads didn't matter as much in the winter, and there was a lot more industry down there that they could affect. So if you're willing to put in the effort and the time and to get all those forms done to get into the States, that's not a bad call to do it that way. One of the disadvantages of going to Europe is that you're flying there and it's bloody expensive to bring all your gear and to fly over there and to get to those markets and back again. Once you're there, it is very good. And I hear we've had success with Hello Moth over there, but it's cheaper to go to the States in many ways and easier because you're going to hop in a van anyway. So.
Yeah. And I'm admittedly a novice about like the visa process to get into the U.S., but my understanding is that you have a window of time once you've filed the paperwork and paid for that access to the U.S. Have a plan, like maximize that time. Like we were working with a band that's interested in coming down to the U.S. from Canada. And it's like they're not going to apply for it until they have a year's worth of touring, at least like if not actually routed or confirmed, like they know where they want to hit. They have a plan of attack to maximize that time. Because I think you're right. Like if you go in with a strategy, the cost isn't prohibitive, as expensive as it is, but to just be like, I want to be able to go down there for a year and play a couple shows. maybe not worth it. Yeah.
For sure. Sorry, now there was questions over here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask more about some of the mechanics of touring and promoting your music once you've identified an artist outside of your own country. You know, like who's your first contact? The local promoter, the local marketing, newspapers, etc. How do you make it that you tour to a new place, not a waste of time and money?
Sure. For Sub Pop, we have relationships with various like press outlets in each territory, and I think that we send those, like we send a press release out, of course, to like everyone across all like European territories, for instance, and then use those relationships with individual outlets to try and get press coverage, and that tends to be where it starts.
And that's after a release or before a tour?
Usually that would start with when we launch a first single. Sometimes that's independent of even an album announcement. It's just like, hey, it's just a signing announcement. Like Sub Pop's working with this band, and we send that globally. I mean, to, around the world to all territories. But of course, like if a tour starts coming together within a given territory, then yeah, we hit those people harder, and we really fight for not just like feature coverage of like, hey, there's this artist, but also like, hey, there's this artist coming to this city, and here's like a show preview. So there's different kinds of coverage that we can adapt the sort of strategy we take within a territory based on whether we know an artist will be there or not.
And you're involved in the booking of those tours?
I'm not, personally, no. We have like booking agents in the UK and Europe that actually plan and route those tours. But maybe someone else.
That was good. Any other questions? I got a question. So with the industry these days, selling records is a difficult way to make money. How does Sub Pop monetize? So you see an act here. This is a warning to anybody here that this is how Sub Pop's going to make money promoting your shows or promoting your act. How is it done? How does Sub Pop make their end? It's a business. It's corporate business.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it is through DSPs. That stuff is monetized, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, and for a lot of bands, that is at least a significant portion of how they make their money. We make our money, if not the majority of it. I mean, so looking at like, I don't know if there's a different system in Canada, but in the U.S., Music Connect, Nielsen Music Connect is how we like look at sales numbers, and they have the physical sales number and then also a consumption number. And the consumption number is a product of, yes, physical sales, but also streams and album equivalents and some sort of complex formula that I don't totally understand. And you'll look at an artist where it's like they have 1,800 physical sales and they have 5,800 consumption. And that's like album equivalent sales worth of streaming and everything else. So it depends on the genre. Like electronic and hip hop, I think over indexes on streaming, whereas a lot of rock acts still depend on physical sales. But that's a huge part of it. Yeah.
And so if you're here and you see an act you love and you sign them, what can their expectation be from a financial standpoint with Sub Pop? Like what's the usual Sub Pop deal these days?
Oh man.
I know I'm putting you on the spot for sure.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, it's so. Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't think I could toss out a number that would actually be true to, that would give you any kind of indication of a standard. It really depends on not just like the artist or like the scope of where they're at, but also the kind of support that they need and they're looking for.
I'm not trying to be negative about it. They're paying
No.
for a service that you're going to provide.
Sure.
But
Well,
what is that payment?
Well, first off, that payment's recoupable. So when I talk to especially a developing artist, like I think for a lot of bands, they see dollar signs when they see a label. And what they don't realize is that, for us, a lot of what we do is net profit splits, which means like they don't get any royalties until the record has recouped, and then we split profits 50-50. So my advice is always take the least amount of money up front that it takes to make a record, because that means you'll start making money off of your music long-term faster.
In many ways, you're a bank that promotes music.
Yeah, it's kind of like a debt-free loan.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
You may not be the same model.
Well, sort of related to this topic, because we deal with so many independent people, I really don't know much about like bigger label stuff, but what I see a lot of the artists doing, and I totally would recommend this to people, is they'll try to put out music on tons of little like independent labels like ourselves. And I think what they do is you can each little label is going to have like a bit of a different like pocket of audience. So they start to build like a little bit. But then a lot of them will do really well independently because, with Spotify and Apple Music and all that, like you don't need a label to do that. You can upload your music yourself. So I've seen, I could list off like 20 artists that are making a ton of money streaming their, you're probably like cringing because I'm telling everybody not to go to labels. But
So, well, I don't think a label belongs for everybody anyway.
They're
What you're saying
making
is great.
a ton of money that they can support themselves, and then they can go and support their own tours if they want to play shows.
You're talking about like a middle class living, upper middle class living, or
Yeah, I know some people who are doing like extremely well. And that's like a balance between, say, like hitting on Spotify playlists. That'll give you like a nice boost that can get you to a place where you can start making those streams like independently of the playlists. You definitely don't want to rely on that because it's not going to be going forever. But another thing I was going to mention earlier is we do a lot of partnerships with like YouTube channels. So, we work with like producers and like hip hop stuff, but even if like you're a band or whatever, I think you could, I'm sure they exist. There's probably a ton of YouTube channels that they just post like a song or maybe a music video or whatever. And you can get a ton of followers and actions, and a lot of these YouTube channels will like throw up a link to your project, and like we can get like a shitload of action from stuff like that. So it's extremely possible, like more than ever, to build it yourself, and not rely upon sort of the traditional way that things have been done.
that's great. We don't have too much time left. I have more questions if people. I don't want to hog the question period. Anybody else? Thoughts? It doesn't have to be a question. It could be a comment. Call us all wrong. I don't care. Let's go to Marphen again. So, New Skool Rules. You help curate that festival, obviously, and I'm a hip hop act from Calgary. I want to play New Skool Rules. Is it a good idea that I could fly over there and do it?
No, don't.
And B, how do I do it?
Get in contact. You can get to New Skool Rules, fill in the link.
No, are you okay? Are you feeling? That sounds like a little dismissal. I mean,
No,
are you going to listen to everything that comes through that link?
Mostly. But I wouldn't say to anyone, to anybody to do it. But if you're interested, and I'm really also interested. I'm open-minded here. I'm really trying to get to know what is available, what is Canada doing, what is there. So get advantage of that, I would say. So yes, I'm really pretty much interested in a lot at this point.
Is there sort of an exotic nature to that? So we got a hip hop act from Canada. Do you put Canada in brackets after their name?
Yeah.
Canada has hip hop.
Yeah. No, but especially in Holland, we're very interested in exotic parts and new things. So yeah.
Great. Okay, if there's no more any last call. No more questions. Do you have another question? No. Yeah, nobody else is going to step it up. You go ahead.
Yeah.
How do you guys plan out when you check out a conference like this? Is there 800 shows a night? You make your decision beforehand, spontaneous, you wander around?
It's a combination of what you're telling. You get some information up front. You try to do some research up front. So you can be everywhere, and you get approached also as well. So based on that, that's why how I make my planning. Yes.
Nick, same thing.
Generally, like I'll come to a conference with a couple kind of anchor bands or artists that I want to see, but like a general A&R rule for myself is to always see the opener. Like every show that I go to, like for artist discovery purposes, it's like if you're gonna go, like go see the band that like is close enough to the band you know you're gonna see that they're opening the show or they're like second of three, whatever. And so I try to do that while I'm here as well. Like I may know I want to see the band at like 9 o'clock tonight. Well, I'll go to the band that's playing at 7:32 and try and tack on as much of that as possible. But
You're hoping to stumble across something. At
exactly,
that point.
yeah, because that's how a lot of it happens. I mean, there's no way, given the amount of music that we're being sent or that we're hearing that I'm going to know every band at every conference. But being open-minded and at least taking the time to try and see as much of it, to stumble across it while I'm here, that's sort of my
Especially
goal.
if it's very well curated. Like this
Yeah.
event is very well curated. It's,
Totally.
yeah. I can't say the same for Canadian Music Week particularly, but I'm sure slamming that today. I know. What about peer? Sorry, let me just finish off with Nick. What about peer recommendations? So Marphen says to you, "Hey, I heard about these guys. Does that encourage you more?"
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's how, in one way or another, like peer recommendations is a huge part of how A&R works at every level. Like I was saying before, like hearing from booking agents, managers, whatever, like, you should check this out. Here's a little bit about them. Like, especially having like an interpersonal moment at a conference, someone says that holds a lot of weight and will bring me out for sure.
Did you want to touch on that?
I mean, for us, we find music through a mix of submissions, stuff we just come across. That's. We also do like large compilations where we'll kind of open it up to the public. Anybody can send us stuff.
We listen to everything that gets sent to you.
I get Mike to do a lot of it now, and he actually does listen to everything, front to back, and he sits, which is good because I can't do that all the time. But we discover a lot of stuff through that way, like people we would never probably come across otherwise. So that's kind of an interesting way to, but that's just kind of something unique that we do. Like, we'll put out a compilation with like 50 to 100 songs, which is crazy, but the album itself kind of becomes like a playlist in a way.
Okay, I'm going to close off. You've inspired me to close off. I told you I had a Chad Van Galen story. I'll tell it. And because this is one of the Chad Van Galen discovery stories, and it kind of ties into what we are just talking about. So Chad, I don't know if you know who Chad Van Galen is, but he's on Sub Pop. He's one of Calgary's more successful artists. He was busking outside of the pizza place on 17th Avenue for years, and people just loved him and gave him lots of money. And he started getting a reputation by doing this about how good he was. And then bit more of a reputation. I saw him at a Rock Against Racism thing, and I go, he's really good. And this is, I was really impressed. I was at one of these conferences in Edmonton, and I was going for lunch with another promoter, and a guy named Rob Zeffirelli, who was, I can't remember what agency, he's one of the bigger agents in Canada, and I can't remember who he was with at the time, what agency. And we're having lunch, and he says, what's happening in Calgary? What happens in this process, by the way, is things get sort of fed up the chain a little bit. And I hear from people on the street about Chad Van Galen. Then I check it out. I go, people are talking about this guy. Then I go check it out. And then I start telling people in Toronto about Chad Van Galen. Then people in Toronto start telling people internationally about Chad Van Galen. This is how these things happen. We're having this lunch with this rather important agent in Canada. And what's happening in Calgary? And we're like, oh, this, and this. And this Chad Van Galen guy, people are talking about this Chad Van Galen guy right up your alley. And he's heard this from us a million times, so he's kind of dismissing. He's going in one ear and out the other a little bit. He's sort of, but as we're doing this, the server's there in Edmonton and goes, Chad Van Galen, I love that guy. And the lights go off in his eyes. He goes, okay, these guys said it, and she said it. And then he signed him, the Chad Van Galen after that. And then it just started to snowball from there, and he got Sub Pop after that, and things started to happen. So that's just an example of how this can happen. Feed it up the chain a little bit. Feed it up through people. Is that a good way to end? We're fine with that? Any other comments?
We're good.
No,
Yeah, okay. Thanks, everybody, for coming. That was a lot of fun.